First of all, I got to strongly disagree that good governance in this country staved off the financial disasters. In fact, au contraire, other countries in the region like Indonesia and such countries have made a much better recovery than Malaysia. We've been overtaken by countries that were behind us, and that's because of poor governance. And we're talking about economic justice. Look at the situation in our country. 40% of the population earns below 1,500 ringgit, which means we're talking about poverty level. 40%, that's almost half the population. Only about 30% of the country even makes it, students make it to tertiary education, as opposed to in South Korea, you've got 95% who make it. Much of the wealth of the country, if I'm not mistaken, is owned by about 20%. About 20% of a select group own much of the wealth of this country. Is that economic justice? So you've got and wages are stagnant, prices are rising, whereas the rich are fine, the mass of the middle income and the poor are suffering. Clearly that's not economic justice. Now how do we address that? Now on religion being the opiate of the masses, I've got to agree with Mr. Lee. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's a case of Marx, or rather it's a case of the spectre of Marx's exaggeration haunting this auditorium. Because religion being an opiate of the masses, he was talking in the context of Victorian England. In Victorian England, you had the large number of people working in the factories. I think he came up with many ideas, Engels, Marx, of the situation in the factories and the lives of factory workers. And there were the Chartist insurrections at that time. And in that context, there was that fear that religion would make them indifferent to a struggle to pull themselves up and get justice for themselves. I don't know whether that's entirely relevant now. Of course, Marx being a polemicist will of course over-egg the pudding in order to make an argument. There's some truth in it, but as like all polemicists, he will take it to extremes or to the boundaries to make his point. Now, I see religion is faith. Faith gives solace, but not only solace. Faith, viewed properly, roots people in good conduct. It roots people in the good things. Mercy, compassion, regard for your fellow man. I would think all the major faiths would inculcate this, regard for your fellow man. And following those concepts, if those concepts were followed, we wouldn't be having this problem of economic imbalances. We wouldn't be having the problem of people hoarding wealth, monopolizing of a small coterie up in government, enriching their cronies and their friends and their relatives and such things. We would not be having that if the ideas of the major faiths were actually held to by people, particularly the people who rule over us, particularly the people who are most responsible for deciding on the policies by which people live in this country. So the way I see it is that economic justice, faith, if only, look, let's put it this way, most of the major faiths in this country, or rather in the world, are to a certain extent revolutionary in their nature. Why? Because they teach people to go against their own self-interest. It seeks to ennoble man and raise him up from the coarse earth on which he was born and in which he lives. And what does it achieve by doing that? At the end of the day, the man who can follow those precepts of faith would end up feeling good about himself. He would have lived a life that gives satisfaction. he would have lived a life in which, you know, he does not feel embittered, he does not feel haunted by all sorts of conflicts in his breast, because he is doing good, he has let go of it. So I think this is what faith teaches, and that I think is the kind of relationship that faith can enjoy with justice. But it's tough, because vested interests, the feeling that number one is important, all these things are deep-rooted. And the argument has been going on, as I said, for centuries. And here we are talking about it, but the dialogue is the way for people to refocus on what are the important things, what are the good things, what are the things that we should really be holding on to. Yeah, thanks. Can we have Reverend?
As the last speaker in the panel, I can always speak on the things that have already been said. So let's start with Karl Marx. Well, it's well and good to criticize him and to say that the dictum that he has made has not borne fruits. But I think that's quite easy to write him off. I think the point that he makes is that there is, in human relations, always social conditioning. In our relationship in society, there are forces working upon us. So, I think if you want to write off Karl Marx, no problem, he's not God. But the point is, I think we have to keep this truth in mind, that in all processes of human relations, there is social conditioning. So we come to this point about justice and faith. And you made a very profound statement, religions are revolutionary. I am a student of history, I take great interest in history, and especially church history. And I beg to differ from you. If you say religion is revolutionary, please show me where and when and which period. I'm not making the discussion trivial. We tend to idolize or bring an ideal in order to give support to our religion. But if you take it from the perspective of social conditioning and go back to the sources of our faith, which is the scriptures that we read, and see how the very one who brought the revelation of God to us, that critique that the founders of religion exercise in their day and time is what is revolutionary, not the religion. Why? Because religion can also fall a victim of social conditioning. So, we have parties that call themselves by religions. Here in this country, in Europe, and in the past, or even if you have in Thailand, there may be a party that is influenced by Buddhism. In Sri Lanka, in India, a Hindu party. Has it made that country any better? In fact, by the very fact of invoking a religious affiliation, they complicate the matter, and they are acting upon the conditions that are forcing them to champion that particular religious point of view. I give you an illustration, and I take my own Christian. And Christianity, unfortunately, has the history of colonialism. And so Archbishop Desmond Tutu has a wonderful story. He shares in many of the speeches and important places he is called to speak to. He said when the missionaries came to Africa, they brought us the Bible. We read the Bible. Then they said, close your eyes and I teach you to pray. And so they closed their eyes and they prayed. When they opened their eyes, they had the Bible, but the land was gone. For the colonialists, for those people who had come to Africa, had taken that land away. But that is not the end of the story. Because Desmond Tutu says the thing they were not prepared was that they thought the Bible will cloud our mind and we will be concentrated only on godly things and they can abuse and exploit the land. But when they began to read the Bible, and it took a lot of critical viewing of the scriptures, they began to discover that there was a disconnect between what the missionaries were talking about the faith and the realities of their life. Because the missionaries were saying that somehow in the religion there's a white church and there's a black church. And that is accepted in Christianity. So, my friends, I'm just making that point that in politics, in economics, in the social relations, even religion, in fact, I think, my humble opinion, religion must be the first to be criticized. Because we have to ask what kind of position we take in the politics of power relations. Are we seeking power? And if you are seeking power, how does that power fit into your religious worldview? Is it a power of domination? Is it a power of condescending upon others? Is it a power of dividing people? If you look into the economics, does your religion condone capitalism? Does your religion support the growing gap between rich and poor? And if there is a resistance to that, what are the forces at work that we should be speaking to? And some of that may be secular things, but there needs to be a change in order to come to the pristine values which speak about the fullness of life. And that is an economics of greed by whatever name or label will not stand. Only an economics of sharing and a social value of caring. And these are the real things, the core that can bring us together as religious communities, because there are beautiful examples in the life of our prophets which show that in their day and time they were the most revolutionary, because they called on and invoked on things that are godly, and things that are godly calls into question the politics of man. And politics of man is usually driven by power, by separation, by domination, and also by exploitation. So I think it is, if there's that point that it needs to be made at this juncture, I think if we have to have faith and justice, we have to start with our own religion and what are the social conditions that are shaping what the things that we are saying within our own religious traditions.